our alliance with these primitive beings. Admiral Krell's mandibles clicked in agreement. The insectoid Thraxian had little patience for what he saw as human weakness. Their ships are outdated, their weapons insufficient. The Zephyrians have superior firepower and numbers. Mathematics suggests human extinction within 6 standard cycles. In the corner of the room, Ambassador Sarah Chen sat quietly, her fingers drumming against the metal table. She had been Earth's representative to the Galactic Defense Council for 3 years, watching as alien species constantly underestimated humanity. They saw humans as the newcomers, the species that had barely mastered faster-than-light travel, while others had been exploring the galaxy for millennia. With respect, "Admiral," Sarah finally spoke, her voice cutting through the alien chatter, "you're making the same mistake the Zephyrians are making. You're judging us by our technology, not our people." The room fell silent. Several alien heads turned toward the human ambassador, their various optical organs focusing on her with what could only be described as condescending amusement. "Ambassador Chen." Admiral Krell's voice carried the mechanical translation perfectly, but the underlying dismissive tone was unmistakable. "Your species has heart, we acknowledge this. But heart does not stop plasma cannons. Courage does not deflect energy shields." Sarah stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "You want to know what stops plasma cannons? What deflects energy shields? Let me tell you about someone we call Ghost." The aliens exchanged glances. Commander Vex's tongue flicked out, tasting the air with obvious skepticism. "Ghost? This is your secret weapon? A specter?" "Not a specter," Sarah smiled, pulling up her personal datapad. "A person. A human being who started as nothing more than a joke among our military planners. They gave her the code name Ghost because she was so quiet during training, so forgettable that instructors sometimes forgot she was there. She activated the holographic projector, showing a simple personnel file. The image displayed a young woman with unremarkable features. Brown hair, average height, the kind of face that would disappear in a crowd. Her name was listed as Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez, age 24, from the agricultural world of New Terra. "This is your great warrior?" Admiral Krell's mandibles clicked with what humans had learned to recognize as laughter. "She appears ordinary." "Exactly," Sarah said. "That's what made her perfect." The hologram shifted, showing military training scores. Maya's records were consistently average. Not the best, not the worst, just solidly middle of the pack in every category. Marksmanship, physical fitness, tactical analysis, all perfectly unremarkable. "Your military leadership chose this individual for a special mission based on mediocrity?" Commander Vex's confusion was evident in his tone. Sarah's smile widened. "Our military leadership chose her because she was invisible. Because in a galaxy full of species that judge worth by appearance, by obvious strength, by technological superiority, sometimes the most dangerous person is the one nobody notices." She gestured to the hologram, which now displayed a timeline of recent events. 3 months ago, the Zephyrian Empire began their push into human space. Their strategy was simple: overwhelming force, superior technology, complete domination. They established forward command bases on captured worlds, believing human resistance would crumble under their advanced weaponry. The display zoomed in on the first lost colony, Kepler Prime. The tactical readout showed Zephyrian forces had overwhelming numerical superiority, with energy shields that deflected human projectile weapons and plasma cannons that could punch through standard Earth armor. "The Zephyrians took Kepler Prime in 6 hours," Sarah continued. "They set up their command structure, established supply lines, began processing the human population for forced labor. Standard occupation protocol for them. What they didn't expect was that one unremarkable human soldier had been left behind during the evacuation." The room was quiet now, even the ambient hum of the life support systems seeming to fade as the aliens focused on Sarah's words. She had their attention and she knew it. Lieutenant Rodriguez had been on a routine patrol when the attack began. By the time she made it back to the settlement, the evacuation ships were gone. She was alone, on a hostile world, surrounded by enemy forces that outnumbered her by thousands to one. The hologram shifted again, showing the layout of the captured colony. Red markers indicated Zephyrian positions, command posts, weapon emplacements, troop barracks, supply depots. It looked impregnable. Any reasonable person would have tried to escape to find a way off-world and rejoin the human fleet, Sarah said. But Maya Rodriguez wasn't thinking about escape. She was thinking about the families that had been separated during the evacuation, about the elderly humans who couldn't run fast enough, about the children who had watched their homes burn. Admiral Krell leaned forward, his 4 eyes focusing intently on the display. What did this one human do against an entire occupation force? Sarah's expression grew serious. She became a ghost. The hologram zoomed in on a specific building, a Zephyrian supply depot that had been converted from a human grain silo. Security footage showed everything normal at 0300 hours. By 0600 hours, the entire facility was destroyed, and 3 tons of military supplies had vanished without a trace. The Zephyrians initially blamed equipment malfunction, Sarah explained. Their technology was supposed to be infallible. The idea that a single human could infiltrate their secured facility was unthinkable. More footage appeared, showing a communications array that had been transmitting perfectly at midnight and was found severed and useless at dawn, then a weapons cache that had simply vanished overnight, with security recordings showing nothing but empty corridors and sleeping guards. After the 4th incident, the Zephyrian commander ordered increased patrols, enhanced security protocols, and sensor sweeps of the entire colony, Sarah continued. They were hunting for a ghost that left no trace, made no sound, and struck without warning. The display showed the psychological evaluation reports that Zephyrian Command had filed. Words like impossible, supernatural, and ghost phenomenon appeared repeatedly in the translated text. The most remarkable thing, Sarah said, was that she never killed anyone. This statement caused visible surprise among the alien observers. Commander Vex's head tilted to one side, a gesture of confusion among his species. She caused all this disruption without eliminating enemy personnel? Maya Rodriguez understood something that most military strategists miss, Sarah explained. Dead soldiers get replaced. Terrified soldiers tell stories. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Sarah could see the wheels turning in the various alien minds around the table. They were beginning to understand that this wasn't just about one human on one world. This is where our former home. The Zephyrians had tried everything to find her. Thermal scanners, motion detectors, even bringing in their famous tracker hounds from the Vega system. But Maya had advantages they couldn't understand. She knew every hidden passage in the colony because she had helped build them. As a child, she had played hide-and-seek in the maintenance tunnels with her friends. As a teenager, she had used the old service corridors to sneak out past curfew. As an adult, she had helped install the very sensor systems the Zephyrians were now trying to use against her. More importantly, Maya understood something about fear that her alien enemies did not. The Zephyrians were a warrior culture, built on direct confrontation and overwhelming force. They expected their enemies to fight back with guns blazing or surrender completely. They had no framework for understanding an enemy who simply vanished. The patrol below was making their routine security sweep, checking the same areas they had checked every day for weeks. Maya could see the tension in their movements, the way they jumped at small sounds, how they kept their weapons ready even though they had never actually seen their mysterious saboteur. She waited until they passed directly beneath her position, then dropped a small metal object into the street behind them. It hit the pavement with a soft clink, barely audible but enough to make the entire patrol spin around with weapons raised. They found nothing, of course. Maya was already moving through the building's interior, following a path that would bring her to the colony's main power distribution center. The Zephyrians had established guards there, but they were watching for external threats, not someone who could access the facility through the original construction plans she had memorized years ago. 20 minutes later, half the colony experienced a carefully orchestrated power fluctuation. Nothing damaging, Nothing that would harm the human prisoners, but enough to disrupt the Zephyrian computer systems for exactly 37 seconds. During that brief window, Maya accessed their communication logs and downloaded everything to a portable drive no bigger than her thumbnail. By the time the backup generators restored full power, she was already 3 buildings away, reviewing the intelligence she had gathered. The Zephyrians were planning something big, not just for this colony, but for the entire human sector. She needed to get this information to Earth Command, but first, she had to ensure they would take her seriously. Maya smiled as she formulated her plan. The Zephyrians had given her everything she needed in their own communications. They had been reporting her activities to their superiors, describing the mysterious saboteur who struck without warning and vanished without a trace. They had unknowingly created the very legend that would become their downfall. The next morning, Zephyrian Commander Thex stood in his temporary command center, staring at reports that made no sense. Overnight, 17 different supply caches had been marked with human symbols. Not damaged or destroyed, simply marked. Small Earth flags had been placed on ammunition containers, food supplies, and even the command staff's personal equipment. How is this possible? Commander Thex demanded, his blue skin darkening with anger. We have tripled security protocols. Every entrance is monitored. Every corridor is patrolled. His aide, Sub-Commander Keela, nervously consulted her datapad. Sir, surveillance records show no unauthorized personnel in any of the affected areas. The security systems detected no intrusions. The guards report no unusual activity. Then how did these symbols appear? Thex's voice rose to a roar that made several junior officers flinch. Are you suggesting they materialized from nothing? The truth was even more unsettling than supernatural intervention. Maya had spent years studying the psychological profiles of different alien species, part of her military training that everyone had considered academic busy work. She knew that Zephyrians were creatures of habit, following precise routines with clockwork regularity. She had observed their patrol patterns for weeks, timing them down to the second. More importantly, she understood that Zephyrians had a blind spot, literally. Their eyes were adapted for their homeworld's twin suns, giving them excellent vision in bright light but significant limitations in low-light conditions. During the brief periods when patrol shifts changed, there were 17-second windows where certain areas were unwatched. Maya had used those windows, moving with surgical precision to place her markers. But the psychological impact was far more important than the technical achievement. The Zephyrian soldiers were beginning to whisper about the human ghost that could walk through walls and appear anywhere. Stories spread through the ranks like wildfire, growing more elaborate with each telling. Some claimed the ghost could become invisible at will. Others insisted she could phase through solid matter. A few even suggested she was a human who had died in the initial attack and returned as a vengeful spirit. The rational explanations offered by their officers were dismissed. After all, if there was a logical explanation, why couldn't their advanced technology detect her? Maya monitored their communications and was amazed at how quickly the legend grew. She had become something more than human in their minds, a supernatural force that their science could not explain or their weapons could not touch. The fear was spreading beyond the soldiers to the command staff and even to the Zephyrian ships in orbit. 3 days later, she decided it was time to take the next step. Maya had identified the location where the Zephyrians kept their captured human civilians, a converted school building that was supposed to be heavily guarded. But she had been watching the guards, learning their habits, and she had found their weakness. The Zephyrians rotated their guards every 6 hours, but the transition period created a brief gap in coverage. Not in the obvious places, they were too professional for that, but in their sensor network. For 90 seconds during each shift change, the motion detectors in the building's basement were offline while the new security team ran their diagnostic checks. Maya used those 90 seconds to slip into the building and make contact with the human prisoners. She didn't try to stage a rescue. That would have been impossible with limited resources and hundreds of hostages. Instead, she did something that would have far more impact. She gave them hope. Listen carefully, she whispered to the small group of prisoners she had managed to reach. My name is Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez, Earth Defense Force. I need you to spread the word quietly. Help is coming. The Zephyrians think they've won, but they don't understand humans. They don't understand that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one they can't see. An elderly man grabbed her arm, his eyes wide with desperate hope. "How many of you are there? When will the rescue ships arrive?" Maya looked into his eyes and spoke the truth that would soon become legend throughout the galaxy. "I am one person, but I am not alone. Every human who refuses to surrender, every person who remembers that our homes were here first, every soul who believes that freedom is worth fighting for, they are all with me. And together, we are going to teach these invaders that humans do not break easily." She slipped away before anyone could ask more questions, leaving behind a group of prisoners who suddenly stood a little straighter. The word spread through the captive population like electricity, whispered from cell to cell until every human in the building knew that Earth had not forgotten them. But Maya's message reached further than just the prisoners. The Zephyrian guards heard the whispers, saw the change in their captives' behavior, and felt the shift in the atmosphere. The humans were no longer defeated refugees. They were people waiting for their ghost to return. Commander Thex received reports of the prisoners' improved morale with growing alarm. His psychological warfare specialists warned him that hope was a dangerous weapon in the hands of humans, a species known for their stubborn refusal to accept defeat, even in impossible circumstances. "How many humans are operating behind our lines?" he demanded during an emergency briefing. "Intelligence suggests a single individual," Sub-Commander Keller replied, though her voice carried obvious doubt. "Impossible," Thex snapped. "One person could not cause this level of disruption. Our own soldiers are beginning to show signs of stress. Productivity is down. Some units are requesting transfer to other sectors." What Commander Thex didn't understand was that Maya Rodriguez had done something no conventional military force could achieve. She had turned the Zephyrians' greatest strength, their technological superiority, into a weakness. Their advanced sensors couldn't detect her. Killer teams. Their equipment shows they're still alive, but they're not responding to communication attempts. The remaining teams are reporting equipment failures and unusual psychological stress, meaning some of our best operatives are requesting transfer off-world, sir. They claim the human is inside their heads, that she knows their thoughts and can predict their movements. Nexus slammed his fist against the tactical display, causing several junior officers to flinch. These are trained professionals, elite warriors. How can one primitive human reduce them to frightened children? What the Admiral didn't understand was that Maya had turned the hunter's own expertise against them. She knew that elite operatives relied heavily on their equipment and established protocols, so she had begun a campaign of technological harassment that was driving them to the edge of paranoia. Using her intimate knowledge of the colony's infrastructure, Maya had been manipulating their sensor readings with carefully placed electromagnetic interference devices she had constructed from salvaged human technology. The hunters would track what appeared to be her energy signature to a specific location, only to find empty rooms and the lingering scent of human soap, a psychological touch that suggested she had been there moments before. More disturbing to the trained operatives was the way their own equipment seemed to work against them. Maya had learned to exploit the Zephyrian reliance on automated systems by introducing subtle programming errors that caused their devices to provide false positives. A motion detector would indicate movement in an empty corridor. A thermal scanner would show a human heat signature that vanished when they looked directly at it. The cumulative effect was exactly what Maya intended. The hunters began to doubt their own senses and their technology, the two things they had been trained to trust above all else. But Maya's psychological warfare went deeper than technological manipulation. She had studied each hunter-killer team member through intercepted personnel files, learning their individual fears and weaknesses. The team leader who had lost his brother in a previous human skirmish would find old Earth music playing softly in supposedly secure areas. The tracker who suffered from claustrophobia would discover that ventilation systems had been modified to create unusual airflow, patterns that suggested hidden passages where none existed. Maya wasn't just hiding from them. She was remaking their environment into a psychological maze where every shadow might hide a threat and every familiar sound might mask an approaching enemy. The most effective part of her strategy was the way she had begun to separate the teams from their support structure. Maya would disable communication relays for exactly long enough to make team members feel isolated, then restore contact just as rescue parties were being dispatched. The pattern created a constant state of anxiety, where the hunters never knew if their backup was available or if they were truly alone with the ghost. On the second day of the intensive hunt, Maya escalated her psychological campaign by targeting Admiral Nexus directly. She had identified his personal shuttle and spent hours studying its security systems, looking for the one weakness that would allow her to send the most important message of her life. The Admiral's shuttle was equipped with military-grade encryption, automated defense systems, and sensor networks that should have made it impossible to approach undetected. But Maya had grown up around civilian spacecraft, and she understood that all ships shared certain basic design requirements, including emergency access ports that were deliberately made as simple as possible. While the Admiral met with his frustrated commanders, Maya used maintenance tunnels to reach the shuttle bay and accessed the craft through its emergency atmospheric exchange port. The security system was designed to prevent intrusion from the outside, but it barely registered her presence when she approached from beneath the landing pad. Once inside, Maya planted a gift that would haunt Admiral Nexus for the rest of his career. She placed a single Earth rose on his command chair, along with a handwritten note that contained intelligence that should have been impossible for any human to possess. The note listed the names of Nexus's 3 children, the location of his private estate on the Zephyrian homeworld, and the security codes for his personal safe. At the bottom, in Maya's careful handwriting, was a simple message: "Your families are as safe as ours." When Admiral Nexus found the note, his reaction was exactly what Maya had hoped for. The rose and the information represented something far more threatening than any military attack. They proved that the human ghost could reach anyone, anywhere at any time. But the note's true message was more subtle than a simple threat. By mentioning his family's safety rather than threatening them, Maya had shown that humans distinguished between military targets and civilians. She was demonstrating that Earth's forces could have targeted Zephyrian families but chose not to. A moral superiority that would eat at the Admiral's conscience. Within hours of discovering the note, Nexus implemented security protocols that tripled the guard details around Zephyrian civilian populations throughout the Empire. The ghost of Kepler Prime had managed to affect enemy policy at the highest levels, forcing them to divert resources from military operations to protect non-combatants from an attack that would never come. Meanwhile, Maya's automated beacon was preparing to transmit her intelligence package to Earth Command. The upload included everything she had learned about Zephyrian psychology, technology, and tactical doctrine, but also something more valuable, like a complete manual for psychological warfare operations that could be implemented by any human with basic military training. Maya had discovered that the key to defeating the Zephyrians wasn't superior technology or overwhelming force. It was understanding that their advanced civilization had made them predictable, dependent on systems and protocols that could be turned against them by an enemy who refused to play by established rules. Her manual included detailed instructions for exploiting these weaknesses, how to use a civilization's own infrastructure against it, how to create psychological pressure that would cascade through rigid command structures, and most importantly, how to prove that human unpredictability was a weapon more powerful than any plasma cannon. As the transmission window approached, Maya prepared for the final phase of her mission. She had proven that one human could terrorize an entire occupation force, but now she needed to demonstrate something even more important, that the ghost of Kepler Prime could vanish as mysteriously as she had appeared. The lesson would be simple but devastating. If the Zephyrians couldn't capture or kill one human operating alone on a conquered world, how could they hope to defeat billions of humans who were preparing to fight back? Admiral Nexus received the report of another inexplicable incident just as his patience finally snapped. 3 of his most experienced officers had been found in a sealed conference room, unconscious and surrounded by earth flowers that had somehow appeared despite the room being under constant surveillance. "Enough," he roared, his voice echoing through the command center. "I don't care if we have to level this entire colony. Deploy the atmospheric processors. If we cannot find this ghost, we will eliminate every possible hiding place." Commander Thek stepped forward, his expression grave. "Sir, the atmospheric processors will eliminate all life on the planet's surface, including our own forces and the human prisoners. Then we evacuate our people and let the humans burn with their ghost," Nexus snarled. "I will not allow one primitive human to make a mockery of the Zephyrian Empire." But Maya had anticipated this escalation. Hidden in her shelter, monitoring their communications, she smiled as she heard the Admiral's order. The Zephyrians were about to make the mistake that would ensure humanity's victory in the larger war. Maya activated her final contingency plan, a message she had prepared for exactly this moment. Using the same communication hijacking techniques that had served her so well, she once again spoke directly to every Zephyrian in the system. "Admiral Nexus," her voice carried clearly through every speaker, every communication device, every helmet radio in the Zephyrian fleet. "You're about to murder thousands of innocent civilians because you can't catch one unarmed human. Is this the great Zephyrian honor your empire claims to represent?" The silence that followed was deafening. Maya could imagine the faces of Zephyrian soldiers, officers, and crew members as they processed what they had just heard. Their admiral was ordering genocide because he had been outsmarted by a single human. Escape plan in military history. Remember that everything I did here was accomplished by one ordinary human, with no special training, no advanced weapons, and no support from Earth's military. I am not unique, Admiral. I am not special. I am simply human, and there are billions more like me. Maya triggered the beacon that would transmit her complete intelligence package to Earth Command, then began the sequence that would make her vanish forever, at least from Zephyrian perspective. When you return to your empire, when you report your victory over the ghost of Kepler Prime, remember that this one human taught your entire military machine to be afraid. And ask yourself this question: if one human could do this much damage, what will happen when Earth sends 1,000 of us? The transmission ended, but Maya's real escape was just beginning. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, constructing a hiding place so perfect that the Zephyrians would never find it even if they searched for years. Deep beneath the colony, in the original foundation systems that had been built before the Zephyrians arrived, Maya had created a survival shelter that existed in the spaces between official blueprints. Using her childhood knowledge of the colony's construction and her adult understanding of life support systems, she had built a hideout that was invisible to sensors and impossible to discover by conventional searching. More importantly, she had ensured that her shelter was connected to the colony's original communication arrays, systems that the Zephyrians had dismissed as obsolete, but that still functioned perfectly for Maya's purposes. Admiral Nexus called off the atmospheric processing, unwilling to face the political consequences of planetary genocide over a single human. The hunter-killer teams continued their search for weeks, but Maya had truly become a ghost. present but undetectable, watching but unseen. From her hidden shelter, Maya monitored Zephyrian communications and watched the psychological aftermath of her campaign ripple through their forces. Officers were requesting transfers. Soldiers were reporting nightmares about invisible humans. The mere possibility that other ghosts might be operating on other worlds was forcing the Zephyrians to implement expensive security measures that drained resources from their offensive operations. Most importantly, Maya watched as her intelligence package reached Earth Command and began to transform humanity's approach to the war. Within days, volunteer units were being formed and trained according to the protocol she had developed. Within weeks, reports began arriving of similar psychological operations on other occupied worlds. The Zephyrians had created their own worst nightmare. By allowing the legend of the Kepler Prime ghost to spread, they had inspired exactly the kind of human resistance that their military doctrine was least equipped to handle. Maya Rodriguez, the unremarkable lieutenant who had been forgotten during a routine patrol, had become the template for a new kind of warfare. A warfare that didn't require superior technology or overwhelming numbers, just the uniquely human ability to adapt, endure, and never surrender. As she settled in for what might be months or years of hiding, Maya smiled as she began. "6 months ago, you dismissed humanity as a primitive species destined for extinction. Today I present to you the woman who changed the course of this war, with nothing more than determination and an understanding of the human spirit." The central holographic projector activated, showing Maya Rodriguez for the first time without shadows or concealment. She appeared exactly as unremarkable as her original personnel file had suggested. Average height, brown hair, the kind of face that would disappear in a crowd. But her eyes held a depth that spoke of someone who had seen the worst of war and emerged stronger. "My name is Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez," she said, addressing not just the Council, but the dozens of alien species watching the transmission across the galaxy. "You know me as the ghost of Kepler Prime, but I want you to understand something important. I am not special. I am not unique. I am simply human." Admiral Krell's mandibles clicked with what might have been nervous laughter. "You claim to be ordinary, yet you single-handedly destabilized an entire military occupation." Maya nodded. "That's exactly my point, Admiral. What I accomplished on Kepler Prime has been replicated on 47 different worlds by 47 different humans. We're not super soldiers or special operatives. We're farmers, teachers, mechanics, and clerks who decided that freedom was worth fighting for." The display shifted to show a galaxy-wide map, with red indicators marking every world where Ghost Protocol operations had been implemented. The scope was staggering. Human resistance cells were operating behind enemy lines across the entire Zephyrian occupation zone. The Zephyrians made a critical error in their assessment of humanity. Maya continued. They assumed that superior technology automatically meant victory, that overwhelming force could crush the human spirit. But they failed to understand what makes humans truly dangerous: our ability to adapt, to learn, and to never give up. Commander Vex, who had been silent throughout the presentation, finally spoke. "Your Ghost Protocol has indeed proven effective, but surely you understand that such tactics cannot defeat the full might of the Zephyrian Empire. We have thousands of ships, millions of soldiers, weapons that can destroy entire planets." Maya's expression grew serious. "Commander, you're still thinking like a conventional military strategist. You're measuring victory in terms of ships destroyed and territory controlled. But Ghost Protocol was never about winning a traditional war. It was about proving that humans cannot be conquered." She gestured to the holographic display, which now showed psychological evaluation reports from Zephyrian military units across occupied space. The data painted a devastating picture of declining morale, increased desertion rates, and widespread psychological stress among occupation forces. Your soldiers are requesting transfers away from human space. Your officers are reporting chronic anxiety and sleep disorders. Your supply lines are constantly disrupted by sabotage operations that your technology cannot detect or prevent. You're spending more resources on security measures than on offensive operations. Ambassador Sarah stepped forward. What Lieutenant Rodriguez has demonstrated is that the cost of occupying human worlds far exceeds any strategic benefit. The Zephyrian Empire is hemorrhaging resources trying to maintain control over populations that will never stop resisting. The alien delegates around the chamber began to murmur among themselves, processing the implications of what they were hearing. Several species that had been considering alliance with the Zephyrians were clearly reconsidering their positions. Maya activated another display, this one showing intelligence gathered by ghost operatives across the occupation zone. But we're not here just to discuss military tactics. We're here because we've learned something important about the Zephyrian Empire itself. The display revealed internal Zephyrian communications that should have been impossible for humans to intercept. Messages between fleet commanders, supply requisitions, even personal correspondence between officers and their families back home. Your empire is not as unified as it appears, Maya said, addressing the Zephyrian representatives directly. Your own people are questioning this war. They're asking why their sons and daughters are dying to occupy worlds that provide no strategic benefit. They're wondering why their government is spending enormous resources on a conflict that seems to have no end. Admiral Nexus, who had remained silent throughout the presentation, finally activated his communication link. His image appeared alongside Maya's, and the contrast was striking. The exhausted alien commander and the calm human operative who had been his nemesis for months. "The human speaks the truth," Nexus said, his voice carrying defeat and something that might have been relief. "This war has become unsustainable. We cannot defeat an enemy that refuses to be defeated, cannot occupy worlds whose populations will never accept occupation." The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. For the first time in galactic history, a major military power was effectively admitting defeat to a technologically inferior species. But Maya wasn't finished. "Admiral Nexus and I have been discussing something unprecedented. The possibility of ending this conflict through negotiation rather than continued warfare. But such negotiations cannot be conducted while Zephyrian forces continue to occupy human worlds." She paused, letting the weight of her words register with every delegate in the chamber. "Therefore, I am announcing the implementation of Phase 2 of Ghost Protocol. Every human operative currently operating behind enemy lines has been given the same directive. Total disruption of Zephyrian military operations until all occupation forces withdraw from human space." The DO display showed a timeline that made several alien delegates gasp in shock. Within 72 hours, ghost operatives would simultaneously target every critical Zephyrian facility in human space, not for destruction, but for complete operational shutdown. Power grids will fail. Communication networks will collapse. Supply systems will cease to function. But no Zephyrian personnel will be harmed, Maya explained. "We will prove that we can cripple your military presence without resorting to the mass casualties that conventional warfare demands." Commander Vex's skin had taken on a sickly, pale color. "You're threatening to paralyze our entire occupation force?" "We're offering to demonstrate that continued occupation is impossible," Maya corrected. "Your soldiers can withdraw with dignity. Your empire can claim that strategic considerations required redeployment, and both our species can begin the difficult work of building a peaceful relationship." Admiral Nexus leaned forward, his expression mixing respect with resignation. "And if we refuse? If the Zephyrian High Command orders us to maintain our positions regardless of operational difficulties?" Maya's smile was gentle but carried an undertone that sent chills through the assembled aliens. "Then you'll discover what Phase 3 of Ghost Protocol looks like, Admiral. And I promise you, none of us want that." The transmission ended, leaving the Galactic Defense Council chamber in stunned silence. The unremarkable human lieutenant who had started as a joke code name had just delivered an ultimatum to one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. But more than that, she had demonstrated something that would reshape interstellar politics for generations to come, that technological superiority meant nothing against a species that simply refused to be conquered. "Ambassador." Sarah looked around the chamber at the various alien representatives, many of whom were frantically consulting with their home governments. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted, not through superior weapons or advanced technology, but through the uniquely human understanding that some things were worth any sacrifice. "Honored delegates," Sarah said, her voice carrying quiet confidence. "I believe we have much to discuss about the future of human-alien relations. But first, I think it's time we acknowledge something that should have been obvious from the beginning." She gestured toward Maya's now empty holographic space. "Humanity, as a species, does not surrender. We adapt, we endure, and we find ways to turn our enemies' strengths into weaknesses. The Zephyrians learned this lesson the hard way. I hope the rest of the galaxy is wiser." The chamber remained silent, but the message was clear. The age of dismissing humanity as a evacuation was conducted with military precision and minimal disruption to the human populations. But the real victory wasn't the departure of enemy forces. It was what had happened afterward. Maya's personal communicator chimed with an incoming transmission from Earth Command. Admiral Patricia Zhang's weathered face appeared on the screen, wearing an expression that mixed pride with amazement. "Lieutenant Rodriguez," Admiral Zhang began, though Maya's promotion to colonel had been approved months ago. "I have news from the Galactic Defense Council that I thought you should hear personally." The Admiral's expression grew serious. "The Thraxian Empire has formally requested human military advisors to help them resolve their ongoing conflict with the Hegemony Coalition. They specifically asked for officers trained in Ghost Protocol techniques." Maya raised an eyebrow. The same Admiral Krell who had dismissed humanity as primitive was now seeking their expertise in asymmetric warfare. "That's not all," Admiral Zhang continued. "The Vegan Republic wants to establish a joint military academy where human and alien officers can train together. The curriculum they've proposed is based entirely on your tactical manual." Maya walked to the window, looking out over the bustling colony that had been rebuilt stronger than before. "What's Earth Command's position on these requests, Admiral?" "That's what I'm calling to discuss. The President wants to establish a new military division, the Human Advisory Corps. We're talking about sending small teams of specialists to help other species understand that technological superiority isn't the only path to military effectiveness." The irony wasn't lost on Maya. The same aliens who had considered humans too primitive to take seriously were now seeking to learn from human military doctrine. Ghost Protocol had done more than end a war. It had fundamentally changed how the galaxy thought about conflict resolution. "Admiral," Maya said, "I appreciate the offer, but I think my fighting days are over. I've seen enough war for one lifetime." Admiral Zhang smiled. "I'm not talking about sending you back into combat, Colonel. I'm talking about teaching others what you've learned. The galaxy needs to understand that the most effective weapons aren't always the most powerful ones." Maya considered this as she watched a group of human children playing with alien toys that had been left behind by Zephyrian soldiers. The former enemy's playthings had become symbols of friendship rather than conquest. "There's something else you should know," Admiral Zhang added. "We've received a formal diplomatic request from the Zephyrian Empire. They want to establish a permanent embassy on Earth, and they've specifically requested that you serve as the liaison officer." This genuinely surprised Maya. "They want the ghost who terrorized their forces to be their diplomatic contact?" "Admiral Nexus recommended you personally. His exact words were that you're the only human who truly understands both species' capabilities and limitations." Maya's communicator chimed with another incoming transmission. She accepted the call, and Admiral Nexus's familiar purple features appeared alongside Admiral Zhang's image. "Colonel Rodriguez," Nexus said, using Maya's new rank with obvious respect. "I hope Admiral Zhang has informed you of our proposal." "She has, Admiral. I have to admit I'm curious about your reasoning. Nexus's expression grew thoughtful. You taught us that effective warfare isn't about destroying your enemy. It's about understanding them so completely that conflict becomes unnecessary. Our species needs someone who can help us avoid the mistakes that led to our war. Maya looked between the two admirals, realizing that her simple decision to hide in the ruins of her home had somehow positioned her to shape the future of interstellar relations. "I'll consider the diplomatic position," she said finally, "but I have conditions." Both admirals leaned forward with interest. First, any diplomatic arrangement must include provisions for cultural exchange. Our species need to understand each other as people, not just as military forces. Admiral Nexus nodded. Agreed. The Zephyrian High Command has already approved student exchange programs between our worlds. Second, the Human Advisory Corps that Admiral Zhang mentioned, it's not going to be a military export program. We're not going to teach other species how to fight like humans. We're going to teach them how to think like humans. Admiral Zhang smiled. Meaning? Meaning we're going to show them that the most effective solutions often come from the people nobody expects to succeed. Every species in the galaxy has individuals like me. Unremarkable people who understand their worlds better than any advanced technology ever could. Maya paused, looking out over her rebuilt colony. The galaxy spent centuries assuming that military might and technological advancement were the measures of a species' worth. But the real strength of any civilization lies in its people's willingness to adapt, to sacrifice for each other, and to never give up on what they believe is right. Admiral Nexus was quiet for a moment before responding. You're proposing to fundamentally change how the galaxy approaches conflict resolution. I'm proposing that we start treating each other as people instead of enemies, Maya replied. The ghost of Kepler Prime was never about one human hiding in the shadows. It was about proving that every individual has the potential to change the course of history. 6 months later, Maya stood in the newly constructed Human Zephyrian Cultural Center on Kepler Prime, watching as human and alien children attended classes together. The building had been erected on the exact spot where the Zephyrian Command Center had once stood, transforming a symbol of occupation into a beacon of cooperation. Her title was now Ambassador Rodriguez, but she preferred when people simply called her Maya. The unremarkable lieutenant had become one of the most influential diplomats in galactic history, but she had never forgotten the lesson that had started it all. Sometimes the most important person in the room is the one nobody notices. Her personal communicator displayed a message from Earth that made her smile. Another species had requested human advisors, but this time it wasn't for military purposes. The Centauri Collective wanted help resolving a labor dispute that had paralyzed their space elevators for months. They had specifically asked for negotiators who understood human-style creative problem-solving. Maya walked to her office window and looked up at the stars, thinking about all the worlds where humans were now serving as teachers, advisors and friends rather than soldiers. The galaxy was learning what she had always known, that the greatest strength of any species wasn't their technology or their weapons, but their willingness to help each other succeed. The ghost of Kepler Prime had vanished long ago, but her legacy lived on in every human who refused to accept that problems were unsolvable, every alien who learned to see strength in apparent weakness, and every conflict that was resolved through understanding rather than force. Maya Rodriguez had started as a joke code name, an unremarkable soldier who was forgotten during a routine patrol. But she had become something far more important, proof that in a galaxy full of advanced civilizations and powerful technologies, the most dangerous and valuable weapon was still the human spirit. As she sat down to review the latest diplomatic reports, Maya smiled at the irony. The quiet girl who had once been invisible in military briefings was now someone whose words could prevent wars and whose ideas were reshaping interstellar civilization. But the greatest victory wasn't the recognition or the titles, or the history books that would remember her name. The greatest victory was looking out her window and seeing human and alien children playing together in the streets of a world that had once been a battlefield. The ghost had accomplished something no weapon could achieve. She had proven that understanding was more powerful than conquest, that cooperation was more effective than domination, and that sometimes the best way to win a war was to help